Right now, you can get both Sprint's unlimited plan and the all-new Samsung Galaxy S10 included for just $35 per month per line for 5 lines. All you need is approved credit and an 18-month lease. No trade-in required. Visit a Sprint store, sprint.com, or call 800-SPRINT-1.
Phone $15 a month after $22.50 a month. Credit apply within 2 bills. If canceled earlier, remain balance due. Unlimited basic after $630.20. Pay $32 per month per line for 5 lines with auto pay. Data deprioritization during congestion. Speed maximums. Use rules and restrictions apply.
Football represents something we are.
Football is like life. You gotta push.
Fantasy football is about proving that you are better than your friends.
Hold up.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Faceoff,
I'm going to do what's best for the team.
where fantasy meets reality.
Pure fantasy football nirvana.
And now your hosts,
Let the games begin.
Anthony Cervino and Michael Hoff.
And welcome back to the FF Faceoff, where fantasy meets reality. It is always great to have you with us for an absolutely loaded, overvalued, and undervalued tight end edition of the most dynamic fantasy football podcast on the planet, which is now part of the brand new full-time fantasy podcast network. And as always, we have a lot to talk about right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, the best in the world!
Coming to you live from the FF Faceoff studio at the beautiful Jersey Shore on this Father's Day weekend. Happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. I am your host, Anthony Cervino. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at The Real NFL Guru. And while you're at it, don't forget to follow the show at the FF Faceoff as well. You can find us on all of the top social media platforms. If you're coming to us right now on YouTube, Facebook Live, Periscope, Twitter, or Twitch, welcome to the big show. And if you're joining us right now in podcast format on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker, Google Podcast, Amazon Alexa, TuneIn, or Apple Podcast, thanks for stopping by. But before we get into the action, here is a public service announcement from His Lordship.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
All right, guys, you know the drill. If you like today's episode and subscribe to our channel, please leave us a comment saying that you have subscribed. And once you are done, we will reply back to as many as we can to show our appreciation to you. I always like to remind you that we are a cost-free production here at the FF Faceoff, but just because we are a cost-free production, it doesn't mean that a lot of time doesn't go into our efforts with pre-production, post-production, and research. And because we do bring you a cost-free program, all we ask for in return is for some cost-free engagements to help us grow our community and our fan base. These engagements, interactions are things that you can do right now as you're watching the show in video format or listening to the show in podcast format, wherever you get your podcasts. Every time somebody likes an episode, anytime somebody subscribes and hits the alert icon so you could be notified anytime that we are live or upload, anytime that you share our content or leave us a 5-star rating and a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts, it not only helps reach more of you, but all of your engagements and interactions never ever go unnoticed. We see our podcasts analytics, our podcast downloads and listens, they are booming right now, and we appreciate that. We see that our YouTube subscribers and our YouTube analytics are slowly creeping up, but we do want that to trend upwards. So please, if you're joining us in YouTube right now, hit that subscribe button. It will absolutely positively help more than you know.
And that's an order.
And before I forget, if you ever want to skip the PSA or if you want to just jump to a certain segment or talking point in the show, all you have to do is go into the description, check out the timestamps, and click on the timestamp that you want to go to. However, if you're coming to us on a mobile device, those timestamp links do not work. That is a YouTube problem, not a me problem, so please don't take it out on the show or me. But Doesn't mean that timestamps are going to waste. If you're joining us on mobile or on a podcast device, go to the description, check out the timestamp of the talking point you want to listen to. Take the scroll bar in your video or podcast window and go to that point in the show. Everybody wins that way. And of course, if you're coming to us on a desktop device, those timestamps do absolutely positively work. Now that that's all out of the way, let's get right into the action. Today we are talking about overvalued and undervalued tight ends. First one I want to talk about is Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron had a huge year last year. Right now is going with the 9th pick in the 6th round. Finished as a tight end 4, played in all 16 games. Eric Ebron plays on the Colts team that passed the ball the 4th most times per game of all the teams at a 41.4 play per game rate. Ebron ran a route 55% of the time. Ebron finished with the 4th most targets. He was 7th in target share, 1st in hog rate, 7th in red zone target share, 1st in end zone target share, 6th most receptions, 5th most yards, 3rd most air yards, 3rd most end zone receptions, and of course the most total touchdowns with 14. Eric Ebron also had the 4th most fantasy points per game at a 13.9 rate. 1st in drops with 9. 4th in drop rates. He dropped a pass 4.2% of the time. And at least 11.4 PPR points in 11 to 16 games. If you take all that in consideration with Eric Ebron, you would think he's going to have another big year. I don't believe that's the case. Why? Because you can get his teammate, Jack Doyle, with the 4th pick in the 10th round. Jack Doyle is returning, coming off of a hip injury. So far, so good with his progression coming off the injury this offseason. Doyle caught 26 of 33 targets, 245 yards, 2 touchdowns. Doyle, while Eric Ebron ran a route 55% of the time, Jack Doyle ran a route 63.1% of the time. So Doyle is running more routes when he's on the field. Doyle also had, despite only playing in 6 games, he had the 10th most red zone receptions. He caught 6 red zone receptions on 7 targets, 10.1 PPR points per game, and he had at least 11.6 PPR points in half of his games. Not only is Jack Doyle returning, not only is that going to affect Eric Ebron, but the Colts also drafted Paris Campbell and signed Devin Funchess. They also have Deion Kane coming back off of an injury. The Colts last year, their offense was outstanding, but it's going to be even better, but it's probably going to be a little bit more spread out. I do think Devin Funchess, his signing is going to cut into Eric Ebron's red zone production. I also believe Jack Doyle is going to cut into the production a little bit as well. So when you take in consideration drafting Eric Ebron with the 9th pick in the 6th round, I am fading Eric Ebron and probably taking a chance on Jack Doyle in the 10th if I am drafting any Colts tight end. Another player that I like more than Eric Ebron, and you can get him around later, and that's Vance McDonald. You can get Vance, 9th pick in the 7th round. Vance was the tight end 10 of 15 games. A big knock on McDonald historically were injuries. However, despite missing the first game of the year in 2018, he played in every single one after that. McDonald, 50 receptions on 71 targets, 610 yards, 4 touchdowns. Steelers passed more than any other team at a 44.6 play per game rate, and McDonald ran a route on 53.5% of those passing plays. 11th most targets, 73. 11th most receptions, 11th most yards. But what stands out to me with Vance McDonald is his yards after the catch. He is a playmaker. He finished amongst tight ends 4th in yards after catch with 359. So 359 out of his 610 yards, came after the catch. He only had 10 red zone targets, 6 in the end zone, and 5 red zone receptions. I think the targets overall are going to go up. Why? Because Antonio Brown is gone. And with Antonio Brown gone, there is 168 vacated targets. They're all not going to go to Juju, and they're all not going to go to Moncrief, that's for sure. And they're not going to go to James Washington either. I think they're going to be spread out, but I do believe Vance McDonald has triple-digit target upside for 2019. I also believe his red zone target share is going to go up because there is another player that is gone who's going to affect this number, and that's Jesse James. Jesse James is in Detroit right now. He signed there this offseason, and Jesse James was really that red zone guy for Ben Roethlisberger. With him out of the picture, the stars are aligning for Vance McDonald to have a breakout year, both in regular targets and also end zone and red zone targets. I think all those numbers go up. We talked about Eric Ebron, and a big number that stand out to me, he dropped the most passes of any tight ends with nine drops. With all those other targets for Andrew Luck, who's to say that he doesn't maybe target Ebron a little bit less because of those drops? Last year didn't really have a choice because with Jack Doyle gone, you had, T.Y. Hilton and a platoon at the wide receiver 2 spot, whether it was Ryan Grant early, Dontrell Inman off the street, or Chester Rogers. Zach Pascal even got into the action. That's not the case. I see a big regression off of Eric Ebron. Whereas with Vance McDonald, I see a breakout year. Ben Roethlisberger knows he can trust Vance McDonald because McDonald only had 3 drops. So I am certainly going to fade Eric Ebron and draft Vance McDonald almost a full round later. Another player I am probably going to fade is David Njoku, and I understand that Todd Monken is now the OC in Cleveland, and Todd Monken had a lot of success with O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. However, David Njoku could potentially see fewer targets. Now, Njoku finished as a tight end 9 in PPR in 16 games, caught 56 of 89 targets, 639 yards, 4 scores. Njoku was the 8th tight end in snap share, played in 84.3% of Cleveland's offensive snaps, and ran 22.4% of his snaps out of the slot. He had the 7th most targets, 8th in target share, right? What's going to kill those numbers, those target numbers, the fact that the Cleveland Browns signed Odell Beckham Jr., and with Odell Beckham Jr. now in Cleveland, I just don't see David Njoku getting 89 targets again. And what also doesn't help David Njoku is the fact that he only had 8 red zone targets. He only had 8. So if he's going to regress in targets, and he's only getting 8, he only had 8 red zone targets, where is this repeat of a top 10 performance going to come from? Moreover, the Cleveland Browns also brought in Demetrius Harris, who is a big, I believe he's 6'7", big-bodied red zone tight end from the Kansas City Chiefs. Another John Dorsey acquisition for the Cleveland Browns. I think Demetrius Harris can potentially be featured in the red zone. So if you ask me, while people are still waiting for this big leap from David Njoku, I think we could potentially see a regression considering Demetrius Harris taking targets away, and there wasn't many, like I said, only 8 red zone targets, with Demetrius Harris potentially taking a few of them, and Odell Beckham cutting into David Njoku's 89 targets. Njoku also had the 3rd most drops, 7 drops. When you talk about Eric Ebron with 9, David Njoku with 7, I think these players can potentially regress because both of those teams added more weapons, added more sure-handed weapons as well. Another player that I love, and that I will take over Eric Ebron, and this is a player that you can get almost 2 rounds later, and that's Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper had was a tight end 6 in PPR in 16 games. When you talk about Todd Monken going to the Cleveland Browns, Dirk Cutter, who was the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the head coach and the offensive guy, when you talk about Cameron Braid and O.J. Howard, he is now the OC in Atlanta. So I believe Austin Hooper could at least repeat a top 6 or maybe even a top 8 performance in 2019. He caught 71. I mean, this is efficiency that I absolutely positively love. Caught 71 of 88 targets, 639 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Falcons passed the 5th most of any team, 41.2 passing plays per game, and Austin Hooper ran a route 64.8% of the time. 8th most targets, 9th most red zone targets, had 13 of them. 17th most end zone targets. I'd like that to go up, but you can't win them all. But Austin Hooper caught the 6th most red zone targets. So he caught 9 of his 13 red zone targets, which I love. 4th most receptions by a tight end with his 71. His yards were good. His 660 yards were good for 7th amongst tight ends. 7th most air yards, 452. Only 208 yards after catch. I'd like to see that number go up a little bit. And 8th in fantasy points per game with 8.1. A number that I absolutely positively love of Austin Hooper is how trustworthy he is. For Matt Ryan, he caught 91% of his targets, which is good for 6th amongst tight ends in true catch rate. Only 4 drops. Very sure-handed guy. I love Austin Hooper's athleticism. He gets open. He was good for 4th amongst tight ends in target separation, average 1.91 yards per target in that category. He also had the 4th most catchable targets amongst tight ends. 88.6% of Austin Hooper's 88 targets were catchable from Matt Ryan, and that equates to 78 of his 88 targets were absolutely positively catchable. Austin Hooper also had 7 games with at least 5 receptions, 3 of which were double-digit reception games, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if he's going to finish as a top 6 tight end again. But I think Austin Hooper will absolutely positively finish in that top 8. I don't see a regression at all coming from Austin Hooper. I think what we saw last year, we are going to get again in 2019. And keep in mind, despite Calvin Ridley and Mohamed Sanu and Julio Jones' presence, Austin Hooper still finished as a tight end 6. Those players are still there, and so is Austin Hooper. Another tight end friendly offensive coordinator in the mix. I absolutely see big things ahead for Austin Hooper. And you can get him in the 10th round. Why draft Eric Ebron and David Njoku in those single-digit rounds when there's quality in the 10th? The only player that I would probably take, like I said, of these aforementioned players we're talking about today is Vance McDonald, because I see a breakout year coming for him. These other guys, fade them and get your tight end in the double-digit rounds, especially if you're not going for one of those big 3 at the top of the draft. As we're winding down the show, I want to talk about Jimmy Graham. I was very low on Jimmy Graham because of his early single-digit round ADP last year. That is not the case. You can now get Jimmy Graham with the 9th pick in the 13th round. Jimmy Graham is almost a 14th round pick. Jimmy Graham's touchdown upside is still there. He only had 2 scores last year, but he wasn't targeted in the red zone a ton. Jimmy Graham only had 10 red zone targets, only 7 end zone targets, which is why he probably only had those 2 touchdowns. Normally, Jimmy Graham is a 6, 8, 10 touchdown ceiling player. And I believe that number, one of those numbers, can come to fruition in 2019. It's his second year with Aaron Rodgers. And what we've heard from those tapes with Mike McCarthy and those articles between Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers and that back and forth, my takeaway from there is that Aaron Rodgers doesn't like change. He likes targeting players that have been there, which screams Devontae Adams. Absolutely. It screams Geronimo Allison. But now that Jimmy Graham is entering his second year with Aaron Rodgers, there's going to be that familiarity and that trust that wasn't there last year, which is why I do believe we see Aaron Rodgers target Jimmy Graham in the red zone. And if those touchdown numbers go up, he only had 2 last year. If Jimmy Graham, who finished as a tight end 12 and 16 games, can pull together 6 to 8 touchdowns all of a sudden, Jimmy Graham, who is a 13th round pick, he's going to return top 8 to 10 tight end value in 2019, if not better. I think Jimmy Graham is poised for a bounce back year. And if you look at the stats, 6th in targets, he had 91 targets. That's not going to go away. I believe Jimmy Graham could potentially be a top 6 to 8 tight end once again, like we are used to seeing from him. I know they added Jay Sternberger. He is more or less a future piece for the Green Bay Packers. Don't overlook Jimmy Graham. He is one of the biggest values that you can get in your fantasy drafts for 2019. Especially when you take in consideration going into the second year with Aaron Rodgers and having that trust. And it's not like Aaron Rodgers didn't target Jimmy Graham last year. He had 91 targets. I think we will see more of Jimmy Graham in the red zone. I think for this Packers team to really reach its peak, they have to target Jimmy Graham in the red zone because he is that big-bodied player. He can be that Jordy Nelson that Aaron Rodgers didn't have last year. Again, this second year in the system thing, I'm going to keep beating into everybody's head. I think that's significant, especially with a player like Aaron Rodgers. And last but not least, I do want to touch on Trey Burton a little bit. Trey Burton is going in the 14th round, 3rd pick in the 14th round, despite finishing as a tight end 8 in PPR last year. I know people are low on Trey Burton, but he was off to a tremendous start. He had at least 10.8 PPR points in his first 6 games. 5 of his 6 double-digit scoring games came in the first 8 games. But he only had 1 in his last 8. Well, why was Trey Burton so terrible in the second half of the year? Well, he hit a 5-game scoring drought, which kind of derailed his season. I think Trey Burton can potentially progress in his second year with the Bears, his second year in the system, second year with Mitchell Trubisky. Mitchell Trubisky, the biggest knock on him is the fact that he has issues throwing the ball to the outside. Trey Burton is a middle-of-the-field player. Trey Burton was 4th amongst tight ends in target separation. Averaged 1.90 yards per target in terms of separation. Trey Burton also has the trust of his quarterback because of 77 targets, he only recorded 1 drop. Only 58 of his 77 targets were catchable. He only had 9 red zone targets. And when you talk about a big-body tight end who needs to be more involved in the red zone, forget about Jimmy Graham. Trey Burton is that guy who needs to be more involved as well. Excuse me, he had 14 red zone targets and caught 9 of them. If the Bears are going to have repeat success, Trey Burton must be more involved in the red zone. And he still managed to score 6 touchdowns last year. Trey Burton is an athletic player. Trey Burton entering his second year as a starter, second year in the system, and with this quarterback, I believe could be poised for a breakout. So of all these tight ends I talked about today, Trey Burton, Austin Hooper, Vance McDonald, Jimmy Graham, they're the ones I am heavily buying into, and I am absolutely positively fading Eric Ebron and David Njoku. That'll do it for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're listening right now in podcast format on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Alexa, Google Podcasts, and especially you Apple Podcast users or any user of a podcast platform that allows you to leave us a 5-star rating and review, please subscribe to the FF Faceoff. Please leave the FF Faceoff a 5-star rating and a 5-star review telling everyone why you love the show and why we are the best damn fantasy football podcast where fantasy meets reality. Because the more subscriptions, ratings, and reviews that we get, the more people we can reach. And in the end, we want to help each and every one of you win fantasy football championships, dominate your leagues, and absolutely positively crush the competition. We will maintain the culture of winning we built here in the FF Faceoff for over 200 episodes and over 2 years since our inception. I'll be coming back to you either on Monday or Tuesday with probably a recap of last week's news. With minicamp wrapping up, there's going to be a little bit of a lull in news, so we are going to have the biggest takeaways from last week. And like I said, Monday or Tuesday, I will be bringing you that show. Have a good rest of the weekend. Enjoy your Father's Day. Enjoy your weekend. Follow me on Twitter, @TheRealNFLGuru. Follow the show at the FF Faceoff. Check out the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. You can find that on all of the top podcast providers out there. The network will fulfill all of your fantasy football needs with over 24 hours of content per week. And it's only 2 weeks old. That is only going to continue to grow. My name is Anthony Cervino. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week.
Right now, you can get both Sprint's unlimited plan and the all-new Samsung Galaxy S10 included for just $35 per month per line for 5 lines. All you need is approved credit and an 18-month lease. No trade-in required. Visit a Sprint store, sprint.com, or call 800-SPRINT-1.
Phone $15 a month after $22.50 a month. Credit apply within 2 bills. If canceled earlier, remain balance due. Unlimited basic after $630.20. Pay $32 per month per line for 5 lines with auto pay. Data deprioritization during congestion. Speed maximums. Use rules and restrictions apply.
Right now, you can get both Sprint's unlimited plan and the all-new Samsung Galaxy S10 included for just $35 per month per line for 5 lines. All you need is approved credit and an 18-month lease. No trade-in required. Visit a Sprint store, sprint.com, or call 800-SPRINT-1.
Phone $15 a month after $22.50 a month. Credit apply within 2 bills. If canceled earlier, remain balance due. Unlimited basic after $630.20. Pay $32 per month per line for 5 lines with auto pay. Data deprioritization during congestion. Speed maximums. Use rules and restrictions apply.